Wanted to do this video on the topic of using a scope query that can filter down what you see in a generic table. What you're looking at here is an example of a table that simply shows a few requirements, and then in those requirements there's some verbiage such as shall in some of these text fields, and there's also some that do not say the word shall. This was an idea that was presented to me by Cameron Bentley, who has just been released into the wild from the University of Alabama at Huntsville. Thanks for the inspiration for this, and this leads to a very important topic, which is how you can really tighten up what you have displayed in a table. And the way to do that is by using the scope query. I had done a previous video on the topic of using that scope query to build a hierarchy within your table. If you haven't seen that, go back and check that out. That's very neat as well. But this is a slightly different way that you can use this scope query, and it's a very powerful way to prevent things from showing up in your table that you may not want to be shown in your table. First of all, what we'll start with is how do we create this column over here that actually performed a query of whether or not this statement of the text field contains the word shall. So to do that, there's a built-in operation that you can use with Cameo that is called string contains. If you were to create a new custom column, you can go to operation from model, and then you would enter in string contains. With that, you're presented with an A and a B, and you're not left with much more than that. But what Cameo is wanting you to do here is tell it that A is what it's looking at, and then B is what it's checking to see if A contains. So in this case, we would change A to a meta chain. So to do that, you'd go to reset and then meta chain. And because our table is set to the element type of extended requirement, we want that to be our base element in the meta chain. The next step would be to simply look at the text. So now that Cameo knows what it's looking at, you can tell it what to look for to see if that contains this certain string. When you open this, it starts out with the three options of containment, structure, or custom. We'll use the custom option. And then we're going to use a filter. So this is going to filter down what is in the table. Now you may say, isn't there a filter option up here that we can simply filter by looking at if it contains the word shall? And you are absolutely right. You can do it simply like that. The one problem with that is that does not get saved to your table or to your model. If you were to do that, you would have that available in that moment. But if you were to save that, maybe commit that to Teamwork Cloud, you're not going to have that view saved. Anyone else who were to open up that table would not automatically have that same view. It wouldn't be narrowed down based on that. But if you use the scope query with a filter, that will be saved. In this case, you go to custom, and then what we'll do is create an operation, and the operation will be a filter operation. The first step to doing this now is to use a find within the filter, and this is going to collect all of our requirements, because at the moment this table is scoped to a package that is called requirements. So we need to filter down to only elements that happen to be these extended requirements, and in this model that happens to be all there is in that package, but there could be a lot of other things in that package. So this will actually filter that down to only start elements that are these certain types, such as the extended requirement. So what we'll do is use a find operation, but now we're going to set the type to be extended requirement. Then notice if you were to expand the filter, you have scope equals null. We're going to change that to say this, and that tells Cameo that we're looking at what we're filtering it down to, which is the extended requirement. So to do that, you click on scope and you go to contextual variable. That will change that null to saying this, and that is what actually points it back to the extended requirement type. We've selected extended requirement, we have changed the scope to being this, and now what we need is a predicate. And the predicate is going to point it back to the exact same thing that we did previously, which was to say, let's look at the text field of the extended requirement and then check to see if it contains that word shall in this case. So let's go to nested operation, and then for the body, we're going to do that exact same operation that we did for the column that said requirement text contains shall. So we'll start with operation for model and use the string contains. And now again, it's looking for what. So it's asking you, what are we looking at here? And the what is what we're going to point it to with the meta chain. So we're going to go to insert and then start with that extended requirement. Tell it to look at the text field of the extended requirement. And then again, we'll use the word shall. Notice down here, this context of the meta chain is set to arg. That could be set to this, and if that is set to this, you'd want to go in and change that to say arg. That is extremely important, and what that essentially tells it is that the starting point for the context of that meta chain is the argument, which happens to be the extended requirement. That is what we set for the scope of the filter. So that is extremely important. Otherwise, it will be looking back all the way up to that package and using that for its base argument or the base context, in which case it's going to be a completely different meta chain. So that's why you want to change that to arg, which sets that base of the meta chain to the scope, this, which happens to be the extended requirement type, because that is what we set for the type of that find operation. Once that is set, you can simply say OK. And now your table is tightened up to only show all of those rows that do contain that word shall. And that is a nice way to clean up your table if you want to narrow it down to only show certain things based on what may be true, what may be not true. So all of those queries you could perform, but that's a great way to tighten up your generic table and have only what is really important to be displayed in that case. If you guys have any questions on this, please feel free to reach out. If you or your company are in need of licenses for Cameo Systems Modeler or CATIA Magic products such as Magic Cyber Systems Engineer, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to help your team get licenses for that. Also, if your team is in need of MBSE expertise, we do have a team of over 150 model-based systems engineering experts who are ready to help. So feel free to reach out. Thanks a lot.